As mentioned before, we will use a MongoDB database and specifically Mongoose, which will help us to manage the connection between the backend and the database. Therefore, we first have to install Mongoose in our project, and then we'll see where we have to implement it in our code. To install Mongoose, we simply use npm install -- save Mongoose. This will take a few seconds, and after that, we can use Mongoose. To be able to use it though, we of course have to import it to our project. The question is, where do we have to import it? Well, the core idea is that our general application doesn't make a lot of sense without the database in the end, because all our data, no matter if it's related to the user or to the places, will be stored in the database, and therefore we somehow will interact with this data. This means the right place to implement our connection to the database is here, our app.js file. So let's first import Mongoose now with our well-known import syntax up here. We require Mongoose. Now we can use Mongoose. The question is, where do we use it here in our code? Well, down here, where we start up our backend server. Because as I said, the logic should be as follows. We first want to establish the connection to the database. If this connection is successful, then we want to start our backend server. In case the connection to the database was not successful, well, we don't need the server because we will throw an error instead. The good thing is that the connection to the database, thanks to Mongoose, comes with an integrated feature to do so. Because we simply now use our Mongoose constant here and refer to our connect method. Connect returns a promise, as the connection to the server is an asynchronous task. And with that, this means that we can also make use of our then and our catch method right here, which will allow us to create exactly the logic I was just talking about. Before we dive into connect right here, connect requires specific credentials as an argument to, well, connect our backend to the MongoDB database. We'll have a look at that in a few seconds. So let's first focus on to then and catch, because if the connection was successful here, well, then we simply start our server. So we simply use a normal arrow function syntax right here and take our code and paste it right here. So that's the first case. If our connection was successful, we start our backend server. In case it was not successful, we'll simply throw an error right here. And here we could console log the error. So that's the startup logic. What is missing now, of course, is here our connect method and the required argument. To get this missing information, we have to Google for MongoDB Atlas. And down here, you can find MongoDB Atlas. If you click onto it and go to sign in up here, you can simply log in with your username and your password. And in here, I'm now in a brand new project. Now, we had a look at MongoDB Atlas in more detail in the refresher module. Therefore, I'll focus on the core settings required to establish the connection to our database. The first thing we have to do is we have to make sure that we can access the database from our current machine. Therefore, we go to Security and Network Access and add our current IP to the so-called IP whitelist. If you click Add IP address right here and now add current IP address, you see your current IP address right here as the whitelist entry and press Confirm. This will take a few seconds. And after that you did the first step, you can access MongoDB from your current machine then. Status changed to active, therefore step 1 is done. Now we also need to create a user which uses this specific network access we just created. For that, we go to database access, and you see we have some existing users here, but we will create a new one by clicking add new user. Now you have to enter a username. In my case, I'll select menu, and a password, which I'll show you here, which will be maybe acadamind123, not the most secure password, but totally sufficient for our purpose here. Make sure to select read and write to any database as the user privileges. And with that, we can add this user now. Again, this will take a few seconds. The user was successfully created. Now we can go back to our cluster. And if we now select connect, we can now choose a connection method between our backend and the MongoDB database. We can connect it with the Mongo shell or MongoDB Compass. In our case, connect to application is the right choice. Here we select Node.js and 3.0 or later in our case. And here we can now finally find the so-called connection string. This string is what we need to be able to access our database. Important though, we have to use our username and password, so the data we just added for our user, to make sure the data access is configured correctly. So we can copy this and now add it right here, in quotation marks of course, to our connect method. Now, very important, we have to change the username to menu in my case. Important, use your own username and your own password here. By the time you're watching this, by the way, this data will not be longer valid, so it doesn't make sense to copy these. The password was academind123. And one other thing we can optionally change is right here, test. Test is the default name for the database that we will create. We will change this here in our project to places maybe. With that, we set up the connection to our database. Let's save this. And let's now run npm start to see if we have any errors. No, this works fine. With that, step 1 was done. The connection is established. But of course, we cannot add any data to this database. This means in the next lecture, it's time to set up our places model.